Kirk Thatcher is a writer, producer, designer, and director who's worked with the Muppets since 1989. And he's with us here just now. How are you doing?
I'm good. Cheers. Actually, I've worked with the Muppets since 1987. But the first thing I worked on that was made came out in 1989. So we worked on it in 1988, and I met Jim I think in 86, started working with him in 87. So yes, a long time. I said I'm the new, if you work with the Muppets over 30 years, they call you the new guy.
Well, Muppet Wiki is wrong then, and we can now cite this interview as evidence that you started in 87.
That's right. Well, yes, I met Jim. I met Jim in 87 or 86, started working with him freelance, but yeah, anyway, it's all gray. All gray areas.
Yeah. So what were you like when you were younger? Were you particularly creative and interested in the arts?
I was much thinner. Yes, I was always artistic and probably a little autistic. As an adult, I realized, I was mildly on the spectrum. I think most artists are. But yeah, I love to read science encyclopedias. Originally, I loved animals and biology, but mainly creatures and animals. And then I started reading, and I just read science books. And then I started reading science fiction. And started to enjoy things like Star Trek and Lost in Space and Space 1999 and things like that were on the telly. And then King Kong, the original, and the Ray Harryhausen movie. So all that inspired me. And then comic books, I got into comic books. But yeah, I was very artistic. I made movies, little short Super 8 films with not really focusing on plot, but more just like learning how to make a shot and what's a good, camera angle and stuff like that. So very self-motivated. I was lucky in that my mother was a school teacher and she knew how to, no one in my family had an artistic bone in their body, and even extended family. I had one cousin who threw pots in college and everyone's like, oh, she's an artist. So they kind of looked at me like I had two heads. But again, my mother being a teacher was supportive because she had students. Yeah. She taught fifth grade. So I don't know what that is. It's like 12-year-olds. And one of them, she would tell me she had taught Walt Disney's nephew. And that he was artistic and drew on his papers and everything. And so she had seen it and knew that you didn't break my hands and tell me I'm going to be a reprobate if I continue drawing and pursuing the arts. Because my father is a lawyer and very, very serious and just thought it was all, frivolous. But so I was a nerd, I loved science fiction. I was just telling a friend today, I started going to conventions. I wanted to go to conventions when I was 12, but my mom wouldn't let me. But yeah, I love science fiction, fantasy art, and special effects, movies with special effects. So kind of a weird kid. I like to spend hours. I wasn't super social. It's not that I didn't like people. I just could spend hours either reading or drawing. So making model kits, all that stuff.
So what was your first kind of big break to get into the film and entertainment industry?
Yeah, I mean, it was a confluence of events, but probably the biggest break was Star Wars had come out. It was 1977, and the movie had just been released. I knew that it was coming out because I was a subscriber to a magazine called Cinefantastique that basically covered fantasy and science fiction films. And they had a little blurb, and I think it was literally a picture of a Death Star trench shot, and it said this movie's coming out this year called The Star Wars, and it supposedly has a lot of spaceships and stuff. And there was just a little blurb, and then I went to the supermarket with my mother one day, and there was a paperback saying The Star Wars, by George Lucas. So I bought that and read it and said, oh my gosh, this is going to be a movie. This is going to be amazing. So, I was there opening day, saw the movie, and started buying whatever was available, including the Star Wars, The Art of Star Wars, the Star Wars sketchbook by Joe Johnston. And so this was just maybe 2 or 3 months later, sometime that summer. I was off school, and my mom came home and said, oh, I met a lovely lady at church today whose son worked on Star Wars. I said, oh my gosh, what's his name? She goes, well, her name is, I forgot her first name, but it's Johnston. And I said, was it Joe Johnston? And she's like, yes, that's right, Joseph, John. I said, oh my God, I've got it. I've got his books. And, so of course the next week I, combed my hair and put on a tie, went to church. I was 14 or 15 and met her and said, I'd really like to meet your son. She said, I'm sure, the confluence of events was, part of it's just luck. Is I grew up in Van Nuys, which was where ILM was back in the original Star Wars days. It was probably about 2 miles or less from my house. So she said, I'll give you my son's number. And Joe was living in the Valley and had started working on Galactica over at ILM. And so he gave me a tour and we just became friends. I just showed him some of my drawings and said, I make models and I make little movies and I want to work on Star Wars kind of movies, the kind of stuff you do. And he was very nice. And looked at my stuff and said, well, yeah, continue drawing, learn your life drawing skills and learn what storyboards are and shots in movies and, how do you tell a story visually? So that's when I really started getting more into comic books, because he said, comic books are a good way to learn how to tell a story with pictures. And I'd always been a fan, but it just made me study them more as opposed to just buy them and go, oh, what a cool story. And so I think that's my biggest break, is I met Joe, and then with and I would talk to him maybe once or twice a year, just call him on the phone. Because I think that next year they all moved up. Because I wanted to just sweep the floors and make coffee the following summer in 78, but they'd just moved to San Francisco or the Bay Area to Marin County. So I couldn't go in and intern. So after I graduated high school, I contacted him after going to UCLA for a semester I wanted to be a film student, but they wouldn't even let you touch a camera until you were a junior. So it was like 2 more years. I've been filming stuff since I was 10. So I called him up and said, hey, is there a chance, I could come up and be an intern at ILM, which is now in Marin County. And well, the part I'm leaving out is that summer. So the summer I graduated high school, I went up with some buddies and we took a tour. Joe gave us a tour of ILM on a Saturday. And I brought up this creature I'd made, a rubber monster kind of puppet, very similar to like what Jabba ended up being, but more demonic than alien. And I gave it to him. I said, well, I don't know. I was an idiot. I was like, here's a present. I made it. But it was just for a movie. But anyway, he was very nice and accepted it. And then after a semester at UCLA, I called him and said, hey, they won't even let me touch a camera. Can I come up and, literally make coffee, sweep the floors? And he said, well, who did you talk to? I said, I don't know what you mean. He said, well, I just put your name on the list for people to interview because George wants to set up the creature shop, not in London this time, but in Marin, so he can keep an eye on the creatures and be more involved. Again, this is before fax machines or anything. It was just, mailing Polaroids to people. So he felt too divorced from the design process, I think, on Star Wars and even on Empire. So I went up and interviewed, and I had been, they call it an autodidact. I taught myself how to make molds and mix rubber cement paint to paint latex. And I'd made, just simple creatures, but I had kind of the basic grunt skills, if you were. It's like if you were into contracting work, it's like I knew how to use a saw and a hammer and use nails and, square up a joint. So I kind of knew how to do the grunt work that wasn't super exciting, but was an integral process of filmmaking, like being a plasterer or something on set. Yeah. And so I got the job because I was cheap. I was $80 a day for a 12-hour day. So I don't know what that breaks down to hourly, but so that was my big break, I guess, to roll that back to the moment where my mom met Joe Johnston's mom and said, hey, and Joe was incredibly nice and kind and kept in touch with me and didn't tell me to naff off. So yeah, I guess that would be my big break. But what does they say? Fortune favors the prepared. So I had spent a good 5 years of my life at that point, making movies and monsters and stuff. So I kind of knew it.
Yeah. And then you went on to work on the Star Trek franchise as well, right?
Yeah, I did Gremlins in between Jedi. I did a little bit. So working at ILM, I got to work on Poltergeist, E.T., Star Treks 2 and 3, and then did Gremlins with Chris Wayless and helped design them. I created their paint job. So I designed their color scheme and their paint job and then made their eyes and did some puppeteering. And then, after that came back, did some rock videos with David Fincher. I was the production designer. He was the director. We're both starting out. He was also at ILM the same time we were the two youngest guys there. So came back and so I'd gone back to UCLA to study computer animation because I knew it was going to take over the film business, even in the early days at ILM, just seeing what it could do. And so while I was at UCLA again at the animation department now, which let you touch a camera the first day, you just had to animate something in it, but you could make a live action movie with animated characters in it. And that was considered, especially if you're interested in special effects, much more amenable to what I wanted to do. And Leonard Nimoy's office called from Star Trek 4, and they said he was looking for an assistant to help him with the special effects and kind of the technical stuff he wasn't so well versed in, being an actor and a performer. Yeah. And I was tailor-made for the job. I'd literally left ILM a year earlier. I knew everybody there. I'd worked on Star Trek 2 and 3. I'd been on set on 3. I puppeteered the Klingon dog under Krug's desk or under his chair there. I was wedged under there with my arms sticking out the side. So I met Leonard and we hit it off. And that was the other big break was, having ILM on your resume at 19, 20 years old raises eyebrows. People are like, oh, okay, this guy must be decent, must know what he's doing. So I think, again, I was just so well suited for the job. And Leonard and I hit it off. Like I said, it was like after a week, he was like my favorite uncle that I didn't meet till I was 21 or whatever it was, 22.
Yeah.
So he started as his assistant, and he wanted to call me associate director, but the DGA wouldn't allow it because there is no associate director. You can have associate producer. So they said, well, how about it? Would you be all right with associate producer? I said, dude, you can call me chief dog washer. I don't care. I'm just happy to be here. So I did a lot. He gave me tons of responsibilities, which was fantastic, particularly in the technical and design area where I just run it by him. He goes, no, it looks great. You know, do you like that? I'm like, yeah, I think it will be good. Because I was a Star Trek fan. I kind of knew the world.
Yeah.
I wasn't, I couldn't quote, well, I could probably quote some lines, but I wasn't, once you get into the world of Trek, you meet people who are basically walking encyclopedias, and I'm good friends with a few of them.
Yeah.
But so we hit it off and stayed friends until he passed away, which was lovely. It was both he and Jim Henson, I always said, were my two, uncles. I firmly believe that the internship or the apprentice approach to, any skill really, but particularly filmmaking or any of the crafts is something that I think kind of went away when the guilds they went away. We have the Writers Guild and the Directors Guild, but then there's some sort of apprenticeship program, but they were basically, the mentors that I had. And then there was Jerry Jewell, who was the writer for the Muppets, who mentored me in writing. So just kind of being amenable to working with people who knew what they were doing and sort of being a sponge, absorbing it was really a helpful, I guess, personality trait.
And in Star Trek 4, you did quite a few things, being the associate producer and had a cameo as well.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. Leonard let me do so much, so I got to write on the script. I wrote the questions in the beginning when Spock is in that room and the computer's throwing all those questions at him. I wrote the questions, and that's my voice that we recorded to work with on set. And everyone thought, well, we'll just change it in post. And Leonard said, no, it's fine. Just, make it sound more computery. So that's me saying, who said logic is the cement of our civilization, which they guess using as our correct, correct. That's all me. So I wrote the questions, I recorded the questions, helped design some of the aliens in the, United Nations set. Yeah. I just did a bunch of stuff, but and then I got the punk bit was in the script, and Nick Meyer wrote the contemporary Earth scenes. Nick wrote those, and Hart Bennett wrote all the stuff that took place in the 23rd century. So Nick had this punk bit in the script, and we read it, and it was hilarious. And I said to Leonard, I want to play the punk. I was in a punk band in high school, and in college I was, I had a short mohawk. I didn't have the one that I sported in the movie, but I'd been letting my hair grow long. So he said, all right, let me think about it. And a week later he said, okay, you can do it. So I just went all over. I went overboard and bleached my hair white and dyed it orange and shaved the sides and just came up with I basically made the outfit or, bought the outfit. I just went to the punk stores that I knew, and it was amazing and great. And then the song, I was just bopping my head to nothing because we're sound recording. We didn't want this loud music playing, and they hadn't selected anything. So I'm just kind of doing a rhythm in my head of like, da 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 da, knowing kind of what angry punk music was. And so we shot the film, and they were going to put in some music, and the music department said, well, we can use this music by Duran Duran, or I forgot who else, but more like new wave. It wasn't really punk. And I said, no, Leonard, it's got to be like the Dead Kennedys or, the Sex Pistols or the Toy Dolls, something angry and he said, well, what do you have in mind? I said, I'll write you a song. And again, he's like, all right, go ahead and let's hear what you got. So I went to the sound recording guys, the sound designer Mark Mangini, who I'd worked with on Gremlins 1, and on Gremlins 2 later, but at that point we'd become friends on Gremlins. So I went in and I came up with the lyrics and kind of a rhythm, and Mark's a guitar player, a great musician, and so he played the guitar and kind of turned it into the 4 angry chords. And we recorded it in the sound editing facility on a crappy mic in the hallway, so it sounded like a garage record of a garage band thing. And that's how I Hate You was born. And the idea was to just kind of talk about what it was like to grow up under the threat of Cold War and just being, when you're a kid and all this crap's handed to you and you're sort of frustrated and angry and powerless. So it's not necessarily, it's not really how I felt. I was a happy kid, but I did, all my trauma and anxiety came from nuclear war. I grew up near an airport, and planes were always flying overhead, and I'd read Hiroshima when I was like 10. I was kind of a precocious kid, and I knew about the atomic bombs, and obviously Godzilla was created by atomic energy. So I was curious about what it was. So I read Hiroshima, and it was like, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo or both. And I was like, oh my God. And I just had this, I couldn't sleep at night. And my mom, tried to calm me down and tell me that, well, we have bombers that are circling all the time, 24 hours a day. So, if they even try something, we'll nuke them first. It didn't really calmed me down, but I kind of used that as the inspiration for what it was like to be living in the early 80s, with still that threat kind of looming over your head. So, and there's a bit of silliness in it too, which I always like, the kind of tongue-in-cheek cheekiness, as you guys say over there, of punk, even in stuff like the Sex Pistols or the Dead Kennedys here, where there's a political or social point of view, but there's also kind of a like, thumbing your nose at the power structure. So anyway, that's how the song came about. And I wrote it so right when I flip them off, the song says, "Screw you," because I didn't say any lines as a punk. So that timed out well, again, by design. And it was just great. And it's been haunting me ever since. I mean, in a good way.
Yeah. So how did you first meet Jim Henson to start working on his projects?
Well, because of Star Trek, actually, just kind of everything dominoed into another. When we were doing Trek, our producer, Ralph Winter, was involved with booking the effects companies and all that. And ILM, especially at this point, was getting very, very overwhelmed with a lot of projects. When we were doing Trek, they were doing, I think, Ghostbusters 2 and Howard the Duck. And so he wanted to know if there was spillover or, ILM couldn't do all of it, that we could take it somewhere else. So he and I had met with some other effects companies. And there was a gal named Betty Jo Rack, who worked at a company called Omnibus Able. And she was sort of their headhunter and helped get them work and, and meet with clients. So she met with us and she and I hit it off and just became friends. And I started, as Trek was winding down and we were in post-production, I didn't have to, it's basically going to editing with Leonard for a couple hours a day. I started working with her to help sell projects to potential clients as a commercial production designer. So I'd go in with her and we'd talk about how the computers could help create whatever effect they wanted in this commercial. And she and I became pals, and I started showing her some stuff I was working on, which was using puppets and computers to do a sci-fi kids show. And she said, who would really like this would be Jim Henson. I said, oh, yeah, he'd be great. He'd just done Labyrinth. Obviously, he'd done Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, and obviously a lot of the guys that had worked on Dark Crystal worked on, both in London and in Marin County, worked in the creature shop for Jedi. So I'd heard stories about Jim and people had worked with him and how lovely he was and how the company was great. So I said, yeah, I'd love to meet him. So she set up this meeting. She was the go-between, and I met Jim at the Bel Air Hotel on some day, whatever, back in, I think this was 86. Yeah. So I met Jim in the summer of 86 or the spring, whatever. He was out in LA for meetings and we just hit it off. And I showed him this show that I was at that time was called Astronauts. He and I hit it off and he said, I really like what you're doing here. Would you like to work with me? I said, yeah, I would love that. So I started working with him on a freelance basis in Los Angeles. Yeah. And so between 86 and 87, I worked on a couple projects, just doing artwork and designs. And I think I flew out to New York 3 or 4 times for meetings where he would gather the creative brain trust at Henson, and we'd all have these, 2 or 3 day kind of brainstorming sessions, which was great. I'd never been with anyone who had done that. George Lucas didn't do that. He tended to be more closed and brainstorm only with, I guess, 1 or 2 people, where Jim sort of liked this big convivial. Yeah. In New York, he had this beautiful cherry or mahogany, I think it was cherry wood table that was literally like 28 feet long and could seat like 18 people. And so we'd all sit around it and they would bring in, coffee and pastries and tea at 4:00. He picked up some good habits from working in London on the Muppet Show. And so they literally had like a little tea trolley or coffee thing and they'd have a break. And so we just brainstormed shows. So I would go back to LA and draw and then finally in late 87, he said, would you like to come out and work on, he'd sold a series to NBC called the Jim Henson Hour and invited me to come move to New York and work on that full time. And I said, sure, because at that point, Trek was over and I was trying to remember what I'd done in that like year and a half, just probably this and that, but nothing major had come about. So Leonard wasn't doing anything that he was doing, I think, The Good Mother, or he did 3 Men and a Baby, but there wasn't really a role for me in that. So moved to New York and started working on the Jim Henson Hour as what I said, like an idea/gag guy. I'd come up with fun ideas for puppets or sketches, and Jim and I, and so I just brainstormed with Jim Henson. That was my job, and then go off and draw. So, I didn't realize, I was too young and too new in the business to realize how spoiled I was, particularly by the way he collaborated with creatives. It's very rare. I've tried to carry on that tradition of working with people, not having them work for you. It's like you hire good people and let them do their job and then support them and inspire them. You don't tell them, no, that's bad and you're doing it wrong, or, and that's part of it's like when they say as a director, a good movie is 50 to 70% of it's just good casting. You cast the right people and then let them do their job and they make it come alive. alive. Well, it's the same thing with working with production designers or artists, is you find people's work you like and you let them do their work and just sort of inspire them. So it was amazing, just working with him and making cool stuff. And all the way up to, we started on Dinosaurs right before he passed away. I'd done 2 rounds of sketches I'd 1 round of sketches, and came to meet with him. So I moved back to LA. I worked on RoboCop 2 for a bit. And then I worked at Disney Imagineering, and he wanted to, they were moving office. They'd moved offices to LA. So I'd seen him when he was out in Los Angeles, and Disney was going to buy the company. So he was setting up shop to be a part of Disney. So I was involved in meetings with that, and Dinosaurs was one of the first things. So we were working on that, sadly, when he passed away. And then Dinosaurs happened, and then became a producer writer on that.
Yeah. I guess when Dinosaurs started, was it assumed that Jim would be leading this thing, and then when he passed away, you're kind of left on your own?
Sadly, no. He didn't really make it to that point. We had it was an internal project. And when he passed, Disney, which was still buying the company, said, well, what were you guys, what was happening? And so Dinosaurs was this TV show idea. And so they hooked me and Alex Rockwell, who was Jim's assistant at the time, and kind of moving into, she ultimately became the head of development for years at Henson. And we met with this writing producer, and his partner, Michael Jacobs and Bob Young, who had a deal with ABC, and we pitched to them, and they kind of dug it, and we showed them, what the Creature Shop had been doing, mainly with the Ninja Turtle movies, these completely autonomous. They didn't have cables on them anymore, which was amazing for the time. They could walk around. You didn't have to be hiding 24 cables coming out of the back of their head or the bottom of their suit. So we showed them that and said, and then I started designing and they started writing, and we kind of all collaborated and created Dinosaurs. But Jim was sadly not involved in any of that, except just a few brainstorm sessions he and I and Alex had. So Brian, the whole thing after Jim passed was, well, what's going to happen with the company? Is Disney going to absorb it? And, and then, is Lisa going to take over? Is Brian going to take over? And so Brian became the head of the company and was very involved, obviously, from the get-go with everything, but also particularly with Dinosaurs, and was a producer on it and directed some episodes. And sadly, Jim really never got to see it come to anything other than he and I talking about it and me doing some sketches. Yeah.
And then Muppets Tonight came soon after. What type of work did you do on that? Because I take it you couldn't design fancy dinosaur characters anymore. Did you get to design some of the Muppets, the new ones maybe?
Yeah, a little less designing, but some designing, but a lot more writing. I was really helped create the show. So starting with the brainstorming of what the show is and what are the characters, and then kind of working with designers, more like how Jim did with me, is working with designers. And we have this idea, like Seymour and Pepe was an elephant. And I think he's originally an elephant and a mouse. And then one of our puppet designers did this hilarious sketch or mock-up of this shrimp. He goes, what about Jumbo and Shrimp? And it was hilarious. And then Bill Beretta, who was one of the newer puppeteers, he was the suit performer for Earl on Dinosaurs. So he, was seen but never heard. Well, he was neither seen or heard, but his movements were seen. And he started getting into puppeteering on Treasure Island, Muppet Treasure Island, which I co-wrote with Jerry before Muppets Tonight. But at that point, so I kind of moved into, I'd been directing little shorts, but mainly was a writer. So Muppets Tonight was a writing producer and working with the talent. I worked really closely with Garth Brooks, who was hilarious, and Prince. So I kind of just kept moving up the ladder in that way. And it was great. We won an Emmy for it. So that was nice. Only Emmy I've ever won.
And then Muppets from Space came along. Was that still kind of writing stuff for that?
It came about, I had written a movie called Muppets in Space, which was very different. It was more like a Galaxy Quest meets Spaceballs, where Muppets from Space, they actually took my title, because Jerry wrote the first drafts of what became Muppets from Space, and it was called Star Gonzos, and it was a much smaller movie. And they wanted to make it bigger and more epic. So they brought in a bunch of writers. So I think I did a punch-up pass on it. And then they went to North Carolina, Wilmington, to Dino De Laurentiis's studio, which is funny because I'd been there when the place was being built and working on a movie called Cat's Eye. I storyboarded the whole thing. So I was back in Wilmington, and there were even a couple people there who had worked with me on that. And so I went out to do punch up. And then while I was there, they said, we're getting behind. The director was a lovely guy, but he was new to Muppets, which was it's a bit of a laborious process. It's not like, okay, everyone stand here and look this way, say your lines. There's so much that goes on under camera. So they said, we would like you to do second unit directing. I said, okay, great. So I got my Directors Guild union card and I did about 2 to 3 weeks of second unit elements and did punch up. So I was kind of doing punch up and second unit directing. And I think I get credit as second unit director. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But that movie had, I think, 18 writers work on it. So it was a bit of a mess. The process was a bit messy. It was not as tightly run as Christmas Carol or Treasure Island. But it was a new director, new producers. Brian and Martin Baker were off in London he was going to do this big epic talking animal movie. And so he was off doing that. So it was kind of a bunch of people who hadn't really done this size Muppet project before. So it got a little unruly. So I was there just trying to help out. It was great. I got my Directors Guild card and that got me in the DGA. And I think 2 or 3 of my jokes are in there. I know one of them was the smack you like a bad donkey.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I love writing for Pepe because he's a little jerk. And I had said from the beginning when I started writing with the Muppets, even like in the late 80s, early 90s when I was writing gags and stuff, I said, we need our Daffy Duck. Yeah. We need someone who's a jerk because at that point, everybody loved each other. And, Piggy was probably the biggest jerk, but nobody else was. Everyone else was sweet and meek and cute or weird, but nobody was kind of a selfish jerk. So I'm like, we need somebody like that because they're hilarious. And Bill kind of came along and he had done Clueless Morgan in Treasure Island, which was just, a big stupid goat. And so he and I just hit it off. Like he got the kind of stuff that I thought was funny. And when we were creating Pepe for Muppets Tonight, he was basing it on an aunt he had gained through marriage, a Spanish aunt who would finish her sentences with, okay. So she would say like, are we going to the market? Okay. So he kind of turned that into this character of Pepe who doesn't want to be a Muppet. In other words, he's not like, oh, great, I'm part of the team. He's like, yeah, the muffins, they're annoying. It's a funny mindset to play against, all the good nature, because Rizzo had sort of been like that, but not even as big of a jerk as Pepe can be. Yeah. And I think for me as a writer, not as a fan, but as a creator, you need somebody. The Muppets aren't out, solving crimes or fighting bad guys or solving diseases. They're just kind of a band of, misfits. But to have 1 or 2 of them that are somewhat pushing against, it basically mirrors society. There's always somebody who's trying to poke a hole in the boat, because they think whatever. Yeah. So it was great to really have fun. So I wrote a bunch of Pepe lines and then was trying to keep him. And then Bobo came out too. Bobo the bear Pepe and Bobo really got a lot of good screen time in Muppets from Space, even though I think Pepe's was cut down a bit. But so that was Muppets from Space. And then because I'd been directing and did second unit on that, they collared me for the Very Merry Muppet Christmas movie, which was done in 2001, 2002. So it wasn't much longer. It was a year and a half later. We started working on that and got to direct that up in Canada, which is one of the 3 movies I've done with the Henson Company, 2 Muppet movies, and then another one, Turkey Hollow, which was a Thanksgiving special. Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything unique about directing for the Muppets that makes things harder?
Well, there's a lot of things that is unique about it. First of all, you can't show anyone below the waist unless you want to spend a lot of money and a lot of time. So. Yeah. And what's funny is most people don't think about it, but also if the Muppets were actually standing on the floor, they'd be talking to your knees. I mean, Kermit's only about 24 inches tall, so they float around people's shoulder height, and you watch it and it seems totally acceptable. But, just like in the Muppet Show, like Kermit would float somewhere between your bottom of your ribs to your shoulders. And that seemed absolutely logical and you totally accept it. But if you actually, if you put Kermit's feet on the ground, he'd be talking to your knees. I think Fozzie would be talking to your crotch because he's one of the tallest ones, Fozzie and maybe Sam Eagle. So there's a lot of disbelief. But what's funny is you meet with people who kind of approach these things very logically. And you say, you've got to throw your logical brain out the door or else you'll never succeed with them because they don't play. And I just mean the directing of it. You're basically fighting physics, and half of the physics, just from the get-go, is hiding the very large human beings under the very tiny puppets. Yeah. And making it look like they're just in our world. The hardest is if they're in the real world or walking down a New York street or something. There's a lot of jiggery pokery to make sure that looks totally normal, even though you've got sometimes a 10 or 12-foot wooden sled with 6 people on it and 4 monitors and cables, just to have 4 Muppets walking down the street and if you want to walking down with a person, then you got to build this big U-shaped thing and have the person in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And it's a circus. And then when we're on a set, then the actors are usually, 40 inches off the floor. So where the puppets are, there's these big gaps. You have to make sure that nobody falls and breaks their neck or their legs. And there's all these monitors so the puppeteers can see what they're doing. So all the sets have to be built specially with a lot of accommodations for that. It's funny because being a puppet director, I've noticed that people just think I do not Sesame Street, but kid shows where it's just a guy, Kukla, Fran and Ollie, or I don't know, very simple stuff, and it's super complicated. I said, no, it's like shooting the Cantina sequence in Star Wars, or Jabba's Palace, or The Mandalorian. There's all this stuff going on that you don't want people to see, and so you can't just go in and block it. I did a regular sitcom 2 years ago that I don't know if it ever made it to the UK. It was called The Kids Are All Right. And it was a very handheld kind of real, like You Are There sort of show with handheld cameras. We usually shot with 2 or 3 cameras. And they had told me, the producers were friends, and they said, we're just not making our days. We've got whatever it is, 60 hours, 5 12-hour days, and we're always going over schedule. And I'm like, okay, I get it. What's the trick? And they go, well, these camera angles and all the kind of the rules of how they wanted to shoot it. You can't do something which we call a swingle, which is like if you and I are talking, instead of shooting over my shoulder to you and over your shoulder to me, which is 2 different setups, sometimes you'll just shoot as if the camera's a third party, and I'll pan to you and you say your line, and I'll pan to me and I'll say my line. You shoot it a couple ways. Yeah, they don't do that. We don't do swingles. Every shot's pretty much has to be a dirty over. And so it's a great look, but it's a lot more work. So I did an episode, and I did it in instead of 60 hours, I did it in 56 hours. It was 4 hours. I did it 4 hours less than they had scheduled. It was funny. It was ultimately I got criticized for it. Well, you didn't do enough coverage. That's baloney. The show cut together fine. So shooting real people in the real world, even if it's got a lot of rules, is a hell of a lot easier and faster than shooting puppets. So I kind of have a reputation for being fast, and it's only because I've done it so much. You kind of know where the pitfalls are. And it's funny what becomes second nature to you, because most of our puppeteers are right-handed. In other words, the puppet's mouth and body is being held up by the puppeteer's right hand. So I was working on a project recently where a puppet has to run around a person. And the storyboard artist I was working with drew them going to the person's camera right side. And I said, well, that won't work. And he's like, why? And I said, because there's a puppeteer in between the puppet and the person. If you want the puppet running around someone's legs, like with a piece of rope to tie him up, you'd have to be going clockwise, not counterclockwise. And he's like, oh, right. And it's funny because I didn't even think about it. Just naturally said, oh, no, that's wrong. So after, again, doing it for 30 years or so, you sort of get the second nature. It's just like shooting wildlife or any other specific, shooting sports, you kind of know the angles that work best just because you've done it so much. So the same thing with puppets. So everything is hard with puppets. There's no easy shots unless it's just 2 puppets talking, standing. Then that's easy. Pretty much anything else. And, they can't reach for a light switch and turn it on. They can't pick up a fork and eat, everything they do that involves a prop or something, unless they have live hands, we call it, like the Swedish Chef or a Bunsen Honeydew or Beaker, like they can do it. But then the problem is they can't hold anything over their head because you see the human arm attached to their arm. So just nothing's easy, but you have to make it look like that's, of course you cut to someone picking up the phone or cut to a different angle. They put their hand on the phone and you cut to a close up, so, or an over the shoulder. So you just have to be an editor in not that most directors don't have some idea of how they'll edit it, but you really have to be very specific. So in some ways, almost every shot's a special effect in terms of you're hiding something. Whereas when you're with actors in the real world or on a set, you can pretty much pick a good angle for whatever it is, and nothing's going to screw you up the way that it will with puppets. So everything is harder with puppets, I would say. Yeah.
And although you didn't direct them, have you been involved in the more recent movies in any way?
Not at all. You're never a prophet in your own town. And the word was, the Muppets weren't successful because of the people who were doing it. So they hired complete neophytes, or not neophytes, but people who'd never done the Muppets before. And they did the TV series and they did the 2 movies. And, I won't comment on what I thought of them, but I think we've done better. I don't know. I just watched it and said, well, it kind of shows that these people don't know the Muppets that well. The Jason Segel one, I will say that it was a Jason Segel movie where he got to play with the Muppets, which was basically that was his wet dream is like, oh, I want to do a movie where, I start it and then there's other Muppets that, I get to play with them, which what it was. And, and he'd also been dissing everything I'd done, not me personally, but saying, oh, Muppets hadn't done anything good since Jim passed away. And I was like, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if we had $60 million, we'd do better stuff too. I mean, the budgets on those things were big movie budgets where we were working with TV movie budgets. But so I wouldn't say I'm bitter, but I do think that the criticisms for what we'd been doing after Jim had passed for the budget and schedules that we were on, I still would stand by it. Well, except for Muppets Wizard of Oz, where I didn't get to cast. The casting was forced upon me and I couldn't do anything about it. So it's interesting because essentially all I've done is franchise things. I never really got to make my own show. The closest thing to my own show would be the Christine McConnell series, The Curious Creations of Christine McConnell, where I worked with this. It's a Netflix series, and I created that with and for Christine. She was, an amazing talent, creative person and a model, but she hadn't been an actress and she hadn't written anything. She had amazing ideas. So I worked with her to create the show around her and so again for her. But the sensibilities in that, the humor and all that tends to be a lot closer. Well, that and Muppet Treasure Island, the silliness and the weirdness of Muppet Treasure Island is definitely where I would take the Muppets. If somebody said, hey, what do you want to do in the Muppets? I'd be that kind of story with that kind of silliness. I think they do really well in a genre or a franchise.
Yeah.
Like, you just say James Bond Muppet movie, everyone laughs. Say, Muppet Western, everyone laughs. Say a Muppet, space opera, which is what I'd written, or a Muppet, haunted house movie, a Muppet Ghostbusters. Yeah. Like all those things engender a smile and a laugh because you're like, oh, I get it. I've been talking to Disney about doing a number of genre pictures with the Muppets, and they just kind of nod and smile, and then they do Muppets Now, which is what you can do for a smaller budget and schedule. Yeah.
Well, you directed, was it half of Muppets Now? A good bit of it, anyway.
Yeah, about half of them, yeah. They re-edited them, so I don't know in terms of screen time. I know there was like 6 episodes, and I directed 3 of the, not episodes, but the segments, I would say. I did Miss Piggy's Lifestyle, I did Bunsen and Beaker's Science Show, and I did Pepe's Game Show. So those are the 3 segments I directed. I think we had a week to do all of them, or I think I did a half an hour's worth of entertainment a day. We worked really fast, but they were all kind of bottle shows. The game show was the same set and it's just different guests. And so it was fun. I think the thing I feel happiest about was the game show because it was freewheeling and Bill and I work well together, even though we drive each other crazy sometimes. But it's a creative collaboration. It's fun. It's work, but it's fun. And Bill's just hilarious when he's freewheeling and, just being on set and live. And because it was this loose game show, we could kind of play with it. We had the Screaming Goat, which is now a character that I want to use in everything I do. Because if you've seen it, there's this goat that screams in it. Because there are screaming goats. So I'm like, let's put the Screaming Goat in here. So hoping that's becoming a regular character to some degree. And Joe the Legal Weasel came out of our. It was originally just he was going to do one thing of don't try this at home. I think it was on Pepe's Game Show. Or it was just in an opening with Kermit. And he was so funny. And again, that collaboration with Peter Linz, who is just a weasel. And we just wanted to be kind of a button-down lawyer. And we started, and literally, he came on set. And we just kind of played around. It was so he started out doing a New York lawyer. That's not. And then he just started riffing, and Peter's an amazing puppeteer. He did Walter. Yeah. And he does, who does he do now? He does Walter, but...
He does Ernie on Sesame Street now, and Harry Monster.
Yeah, he does a lot on Sesame, but with the Muppets, we're still kind of finding his... oh, God, who else does he do? I'm blanking. Anyway, he just came up with this hilarious, super button-down guy with, no sense of humor who thought he was hilarious. So that wasn't in the script at all. It was just Kermit the Frog says, you should, don't try any of this at home and under no circumstances. So he did it with very serious and then just made a bad pun and then and it was we're all cracking up and going, that's the character. And so a new Muppet is born, and that's the fun of it. It's such a collaboration between, look, any TV series is a collaboration, or any movie is a collaboration between the writer and the performer, because the writer sets the blueprint and the performer brings it to life. And with the Muppets, the performers, because we can't go out and cast don't have a cast of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people in LA to go choose from. We have a smaller pool of talent, so they're much more involved in creating it than just saying, okay, that's not what I envisioned, who's next on the casting sheet. So that's, just even out of every project, you usually find one or two new characters that come out of the the desperation of, oh, this isn't funny, how can we make it funnier? A lot of the fun is the creation in the moment, whether it's, riffing off a moment in the script or, creating a character like that where the script just says, a pig walks into the room. I mean, that's how Miss Piggy was born. I don't know if you know that story. But yeah, Frank just was a pig with a wig on in a chorus line of pigs. And Kermit walked by and Piggy turned to the next pig and said, I know him, and then suddenly with this spin on the word no, I know him. And everyone cracked up and suddenly this character was born. So that improvisational aspect of the Muppet play, again, I think the beginning and the end of the day, when you're working with the Muppets, it's work. And again, there's all this technical stuff you have to keep in mind. But if you're not having some sense of play and improvisation with the ridiculousness of the premise, I think you're doing it wrong. And I think that kind of came through in some of the more recent stuff where, serious comedy writers were writing for them and it became a little stilted. Yeah.
And what's this director pseudonym that you're using? Rufus Scott Church?
Okay, well, what's my name? You should know this. You're a Scotsman. So what's my name?
Kirk Thatcher.
And if that was a profession in Scotland, what would they do?
They would kind of fix up a roof of a church, probably.
And so what kind of church would it be if it was in Scotland?
The Rufus Scott Church.
Thank you. Yeah. That's where I came up with it. Because again, my Scottish heritage, I don't know if that's why my name is Kirk or not, but because for years it had been a different one. And then I was like, well, I always thought that would be a great pseudonym because what would a Kirk Thatcher do? He'd Rufus Scott Church. So I couldn't make it Rufus Scottish Church because but Scott Church, I've heard Scott used as an adjective for anything from Scotland. So so that is how it came out. So everyone in Scotland should be aware that I'm proud of my heritage.
Yeah, but what's the reasoning to not using your real name?
Well, the reasoning is Disney won't make it. They go non-union, which shocks me. Yeah. They do these jobs that are non-union in LA, and I can't take my name on it, which is why Christine McConnell, I just get executive producer when I wrote 3/4 of the episodes. Wow. I wrote 4 out of the 6 episodes, and I directed all of them, but I just get executive producer credit. And that's the problem in Hollywood, and streaming services are making it worse.
Yeah.
So that's the good fight we have to get into. Besides Amazon workers, we have to get, not to get political, but the streaming services and with the Writers and Directors Guild, they're said it's new media. It's been new media for 20 years now. And we have to get back to, because it's killing the industry or it's killing jobs or careers, I guess. But yeah, that's why I had to.
Yeah. And you've also directed lots of shorts and viral videos and things, including Bohemian Rhapsody, the big video that people know. Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that Queen actually gave us their music tracks.
Yeah.
Their backing vocals, is the actual Queen tracks, and the guitar stuff is all Brian May and because it's an incredibly dense song. There's no way we could have recreated it. So they were tickled pink to have us, do it. So they said, you can use all our tracks. So that's one of the reasons it sounds so great is it's actually Queen's playing. Yeah. We just ruined the beautiful vocals.
Yeah. Interestingly, that was actually the first 1080p video on YouTube. I don't know if you know.
No, I didn't know that.
Well, there you go.
Wow. So there we go. It'll be in a museum piece someday.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Well, very cool. Yeah. So your web, what's the name of your podcast?
Well, the radio show is the Radio Show, and we're on Shout Radio.
Okay. And do you only talk about Muppet stuff, or you just talk about entertainment in general? Or?
Well, we talk about a range of stuff. We have all sorts of guests on, like musicians and authors, and had a few Muppets people on.
Yeah, you said that.
Yeah, and anybody that wants to come on,
I'll spread the word.
Yeah. And have you ever tried any puppetry yourself, or are you mainly behind the scenes?
Yeah, I did puppetry in Gremlins 1 and 2, if you call that. It's more special effects puppetry. I have not done Muppet-style puppetry, only because there's so many really talented people who are good friends of mine. I mean, for my own project, I have this Kickstarter thing I'm working on, which is a demented kid show. If it was Pee-wee Pee-wee's Playhouse was done by Monty Python and wasn't for kids, but it looked like a kid show. It's called Captain Randy's Submarine. So I'll probably be doing some characters in that. It's completely mental. And originally it was going to be like Benny Hill and Monty Python did it. But with the current climate, you can't have girls in bikinis running around. So it's still silly and irreverent and ridiculous in the way that Python or, the young ones, Blackadder, just a huge fan of British comedy, much more than, I like American comedy too. Yeah. But British humor, and particularly those kind of more outrageous shows, just growing up. That's the reason Billy Connolly's in Treasure Island, Muppet Treasure Island, is because I was a huge Billy Connolly fan. And I discovered him on a Lakers airline flight to London when I was 14. My family wanted to go and see, some of our roots and stuff in the UK and France, and mainly UK for roots. But we went to kind of did a European tour, and on Lakers Airlines, there was a comedy channel, and there was this mad Scotsman doing jokes about wee jobbies, and, and I'm like, who is this guy? He's hilarious. And he's, just the accent was great. And I just kind of fell in love with it. And back then, no internet, you'd go to the record store and say, do you have anything by Billy Connolly in comedy? They go, no. And so I had gone to school with some guys from the UK. High school, there was exchange students. And so they turned me on to the Goons, which I had heard of, again, through Python, the Goon Show. And one of them got me, I think, a cassette tape of a Billy Connolly stuff. And again, this is before it was like 1979. Yeah. And so when we were doing this and there was a character in it called Billy Bones, I said, we got to have it be Billy Connolly if he'll do it. And I wrote it for him. In other words, that whole Jimmy, Jim. Yeah. That was for Billy. And, knowing that Jimmy is sort of like your guys' version of calling someone buddy, hey, Jimmy, hey, Sonny Jim. And so, what was funny was in the read-throughs before, we ever cast it, and we would read it through, and I would read Billy Bones and sometimes even Long John Silver, because the Muppet performers would read their characters, but you needed someone to read the human characters. So I always read Billy Bones as Billy Connolly with my, semi-okay version of, hey, Jim, beware the black spot, and what was funny was when we cast him and he came and did the cast read through in London, a week before we were shooting, one of the puppeteers came up to me and said, that's amazing. He sounds just like you. I said, that does it the same way you did. I said, no, I was, because he wasn't familiar with Billy's stand-up. I think, being in London, he might have heard of him, but he was one of the younger puppeteers who was not on the Muppet Show. So anyway, that was huge. And Billy and I were still friends. We email once in a while. But after that, I worked with him for a few months when he was in LA on a sitcom I wanted to build around him, and had a great time. We'd just hang out and he'd tell stories and we'd drink coffee and maybe talk about the show for 15 minutes and just hear him tell stories for 45 minutes. It was amazing and lovely, lovely guy. And so saddened to see, these basically stopped but he and Pamela have always been very sweet to me. Whenever he was in town, I'd always go see him and they'd get me backstage and say hi and, have a Diet Coke. So I've always had a big soft spot in my heart for Scotland and Scots and Scottish humor. And again, it comes from my mom, on my mom's side of the family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So again, I'm serious. I will come visit.
Yes. In a few years when the virus is over.
Oh, Jesus, I know. Yeah. The Scotch will kill it, won't it? Can't we just drink enough good whiskey so it just kills the germs?
Maybe. I don't know. Not until the pubs are open again.
I know. Yeah. Bugger.
Yeah. Now, Kevin Feige, he found you a bit of an inspiration, right?
Well, yeah. You've obviously listened to other podcasts I've been on. I was at Comic-Con with my buddy, who's the composer, Michael Giacchino, because he did the score for Muppets Wizard of Oz, and we became good friends, and he does a bunch of Marvel stuff. And he said, hey, so we were at Comic-Con, as one does, if you've been going for centuries. And he said, hey, Marvel's having a party or an after party. Do you want to go? I said, sure. I said, yeah, I love what they're doing. So we went, and it was Michael Giacchino, David Silverman, who I've known since college, who was an animator, kind of created The Simpsons as a cartoon. He didn't create it, Matt Groening did, but he turned Matt Groening's drawings into moving characters, along with Bill Kopp and a couple Wes Archer. But so he introduced us as, this is David Silverman from The Simpsons. Everyone's like, hey, Dave. There's like 25 people in a lovely restaurant. You already had a few drinks and had dinner. So, and this was literally like 11:30 at night or midnight on a Saturday night. And then he goes, and this is Kirk Thatcher he works with the Muppets. I was like, hey, Kirk. And Kevin Feige walks up to me with his hand down. He says, wait, are you the Kirk Thatcher? character? and I looked to Michael because I think, okay, you're having me on, right? Like, and I go, he goes, the one from Star Trek 4 who played the punk and wrote the song. I'm like, yeah. I shake his hand. He goes, it's so great to meet you. And I'm like, this is Kevin freaking Feige. Yeah. He said, you're the reason I wanted to be a producer. He said, I saw Star Trek 4 when I was 15 and I saw your name in the credits as the punk on the bus and you wrote and sang the song and you're associate producer. And he said, I want to be a producer, man. You look at all the cool stuff you get to do. Yeah. I said, that's hilarious and amazing. And we've been friends ever since. In fact, I saw him was on a Zoom call with him a couple of weeks ago, and he's an amazing guy, and he's a huge Star Trek fan to levels that I do not even ascribe to. He's got an amazing collection of Star Trek memorabilia, and he's the reason I'm in Spider-Man Far From Home.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that came out in a meeting. I was meeting with Marvel to discuss a project I wanted to do with them, and we were discussing. It didn't pan out, but I was there having a meeting, and he was running late, and he kind of burst in, and he said, hi, sorry I'm late. I got my car got a flat, and I had a thing, and I'm flying to New York tonight. And so I can't really hang out, but I just wanted to say hi. And I said, oh, you're going to New York? I said, I'm going to New York this is a Wednesday. I said, I'm going to New York on Friday. He goes, wait, seriously? I said, yeah. I said, I'm going to be there through the weekend. I'm doing a thing. And he said, well, we should put you in the movie. I said, what movie? He's like, and his producers there I was meeting with were working obviously on Spider-Man at that point. And he said, we'll put you on the street as a punk. You can have the boombox and be listening to I Hate You. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah. We'll figure it out. I'll have our producer call you. And he left the meeting. I'm like, was he serious? And they're like, yeah, probably. If you're going to be in New York. So anyway, long story short, I changed my flight to get there at 2 a.m. And I was on set at 5 a.m. So I basically went to my hotel room and changed and went to set and got into hair and makeup and played, the washed out hippie version of, or bum, homeless guy version of the punk from, the ideas that he still walked around with that boombox and he had a bad time with aliens. So I have this little cameo there. We'll have one line. It's not even on camera. We just go, not bad. But it's pretty funny. But the Star Trek fans erupted when they heard that. And Kevin, the reason, it could just be homeless guy. I actually didn't even deserve credit, essentially. I'm barely in the movie. But Kevin wanted me to be punk on street. And so that's what made people go, oh my God, it's the same universe. Star Trek and Marvel live in the same universe. So it was a bigger deal for fans than I had imagined it would be, but it's been fun.
And you have also recently started offering script consultations for people as well.
Yeah, I have a website where you can get autographed photos. It's a little more expensive to send them to the UK just because shipping costs. But so photographs, and I do consulting on scripts or stories. I think it's either a half hour, an hour. And if you want me to read your screenplay, it's a little more, because I don't do it casually. I read it and try and come up with a cogent response as opposed to, I read it. So, thank you for mentioning that. And probably that's where you'll find out about Captain Randy too. I'll be promoting that there once the Kickstarter launches, which was supposed to launch last November, but between the COVID surge and I had some family stuff happen that was not good. And then work, there's a Muppet job I'm working on right now. So between all those things, and the election was kind of tearing our country apart. So it seemed like a bad time to do it. And then I started working in January on this, on a Muppet project. So maybe by the end of this summer, come back and I'll let you know, and you can tell all your millions of listeners who are rich, all your millions of rich Scottish listeners. All the banks are, right? You guys are all rich.
Well, is there anything you're working on at the moment that you're allowed to talk about?
Sadly, no. That's the thing. This thing I'm working on with the Muppets, did a thing for Disney Channel, just small little bits. Kickstarter is the only thing I talk about because I own it. I'm trying to think the last thing I worked on that's out there is Muppets Now, which we talked about. Last year, nothing really happened. So a friend of mine told me he sold a show to Netflix that he wanted me to be a writer on, but I can't talk about it because it hasn't even started. So I don't know. There's things brewing, but it's this weird thing about this business is, 2 years after I'm done with something, I can talk about it. Like when Christine McConnell came out, it had been wrapped for me for 6 months and we hadn't, it was a year and a half since we'd shot it, but it came out and everyone's talking about it. And I was like, no, I've moved on. So it's a weird thing about this industry. So sadly, no, but I do want to come visit Scotland. And do you have any production? Is it like Ireland where you can live there and get a government grant to do something?
I don't know.
And I'll find out. Damn it, Toby.
The only films that are made here are weird history ones that nobody watches.
Yeah, Oh, no, what was the guy who did Gregory's Girl and
Oh,
the
yeah.
Ice Cream Wars? He was great. And there's about, we see a lot of Irish, smaller, like, local hero and the Grabbers and stuff like that out of Ireland. So Scotland, get on the ball. Start making what was the Sean Connery ad? This is Billy Connolly used to make Scotland for the Scotch. I guess it was a Scottish National commercial back in the 80s or 90s that Billy would joke about. But yeah, get on it. Get the government to, come over there and we'll do Scottish puppet movies. How about that? There's a niche market.
Yeah.
Well, kilts are much easier to work with a puppet than legs. You just have a kilt there. You can hide a lot more puppeteer underneath the kilt.
Yeah, you probably can. Yeah, so you put it on the puppet and then, yeah.
Exactly. And then you can put your whole head under there and no one will see it. It just looks like, we can show puppets from the almost the knees up instead of the waist up.
Yeah. Or even just the full body if the kilt's big enough.
Well, yeah, if it goes to your ankles. But isn't it really a dress then? I mean, let's just call it a dress.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
There's a funny bit right there. Just a bunch of guys walking around with kilts down to their ankles, like, a dress. It's not a dress, it's a kilt. No, it's a
tartan
dress. I have a number of kilts, but I got one made. And when I was in Scotland, I had the full Monty, as it were, in terms of the 8-ounce wool kilt made with, sadly, the family tartans from McGuinness and Montgomery are not beautiful. I think there's a hunting tartan that's not so bad, but they've got pinks and yellows and raspberries and oranges and just stuff that's not particularly attractive. So I think I just got a Balmoral dress tartan, but it's 8-ounce wool. So when you wear that in Los Angeles, it's like wearing a sauna. So I can really only wear it around Christmas time, from Thanksgiving to Christmas here, our Thanksgiving's in late November. So there's about 8 weeks I can wear it without torturing myself or sweating off 10 pounds on my thighs. So, yeah. And Scotland, I guess you would want to have that very warm wool blanket wrapped around your...
Yeah, there's only about 2 days a year where you'd feel uncomfortable wearing that.
That was it. What Billy's joke, and it's probably a standard, was like, we have 2 seasons in Scotland, winter and August 23rd. Which, I was there. I was in Aberdeen, which is the northeast. And I was there in December, and there were guys surfing.
What?
Yeah, they were surfing off the coast of Aberdeen.
I think that is a thing.
It's a thing, but talk about hardy stock. Jeez. That's the North Sea in December. And I will say it wasn't brutally cold out. It was a nice kind of sunny day, which my friend who lives there is from there. It's like, you brought the sunshine with you from California because it's not normally this sunny out. But I love the Scottish Highlands. My dream was just get a car and just drive around and stay in little inns and stay in castles on the West Coast and the Hebrides. And, that's where my mother's family's from, is the Western Isles. But I just need money. That's all. Just send money so I can come visit.
Yes, exactly. Well, where are we able to keep up with you anywhere on websites and social media?
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all just Kirk R. Thatcher usually. It's either Kirk Thatcher, Kirk R. Thatcher. You can follow me on Facebook. I'm getting close to not being able to friend anybody because I'm close to 5,000 followers and friends, which is shocking, but you do the convention circuit, you gather quote unquote friends. But Twitter, I'm Instagram and Twitter. I'm on, I guess, Facebook is every day. So if you just want to follow me on Facebook, usually I can hear from you or you can see what I'm up to. I tend to go quiet when I'm working. So the next pretty much all of April, I won't be posting too much. And most of it's just silliness. And then there's my website, which is kirkrthatcher.com. Just all one word with that R in the middle and Thatcher with a T, just like Maggie.
Yes.
Yes. But I'm only related to Dennis, so don't hate me because she was a Thatcher by marriage.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. That was my defense when in 1976, when I was in England, they're like, "Oh, you're here to visit your Aunt Margaret," and we would jokingly say yes, and then people would scowl. And I'd say, "Well, we're really here to visit Uncle Dennis. She's a Thatcher by marriage," and they go, "Oh, right, yeah, no, good point." So we never got punched.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show today, then.
Cheers. Sure, it was fun.